This rebuild really should have been impossible to mess up. They landed elite draft picks, they signed a franchise superstar in free agency, and they found the perfect successor to Henrik Lundqvist without ever truly bottoming out. This wasn't a slow, painful teardown. This was the kind of rebuild that every team in the league dreams about. A franchise winger chose New York and took less money to do so. A Norris-caliber defenseman forced his way there before he'd even played an NHL game. They won the lottery. They won it again, second overall, first overall, back-to-back years, and it worked. Conference finals runs, a President's Trophy, a roster stacked with stars, youth, and a world-class goaltender holding it all together. So, how did we end up here? How did a rebuild that looked perfect on paper slowly fall apart right in front of us? Not because of one massive mistake, but because they started moving a little bit too quickly. They started chasing the next win, the next run, the next shortcut, and drifting further away from the plan that built all of this in the first place. And now, they're sitting near the bottom of the Eastern Conference with many of the same star players who once carried them to those conference finals and the President's Trophy. Nothing changed overnight. The talent didn't disappear, but the direction did. And to understand how a rebuild this promising ended up this poorly, we have to go all the way back to the beginning. For most of the early 2010s, the New York Rangers were a constant presence in the NHL's upper tier. They reached the Stanley Cup Final in 2014, followed it up with a conference final and a President's Trophy in 2015, and spent the better part of a decade firmly in the playoff picture, built around elite goaltending and a core that was always good enough to compete. But by 2018, it was clear that that window, it was closing. The wins were drying up, the formula that had carried them through years of success was no longer enough, and most importantly, Henrik Lundqvist, he was getting up there in age. When the Rangers missed the playoffs in 2018, it didn't feel like a fluke or a temporary setback. It really did feel like an end of an era, and instead of trying to squeeze one more run out of a fading core, the organization made a decision that very few teams are willing to make publicly. They told the truth. In February of that year, the Rangers management released an open letter directly to the fans, laying out the reality of where the franchise stood and where it needed to go. They acknowledged that the success of the previous decade, the playoff runs, the President's Trophy, the Cup Final, but they also admitted what mattered most. None of it had led to a Stanley Cup, and continuing down the same path, it wasn't going to change that. What's known as the letter to Rangers fans was the confirmation that the Rangers were committing to a real rebuild, one focused on the long term rather than the quick fixes. Management was upfront that this would mean trading familiar faces, accumulating young players, and prioritizing speed, skill, and development over short-term results. That letter became the starting point for everything that followed. It set the expectations, defined the timeline, and created the blueprint for what many believed would become one of the smartest, cleanest rebuilds in the modern NHL. At least that was the idea. Missing the playoffs in 2018 didn't just signal the end of an era, it also gave the Rangers the resources to start over properly. They entered the draft with the 9th overall selection. Along with 2 late first-rounders they'd acquired through a series of trades, giving them 3 chances to lay the foundation for what was supposed to be a long-term rebuild. At 9th overall, they selected Vitaly Kravtsov, a high-skilled winger with top-line upside. Now, I'm going to preface this now. A lot of these first-round picks that New York makes over the following years are big swings and misses, so please hold your laughter. Later in the first round, they added K'Andre Miller, a mobile, athletic defenseman viewed as a modern blue line project, and closed the round out by drafting Nils Lundqvist, another puck-moving defenseman with strong offensive upside. The Rangers weren't drafting for size or grit or short-term needs. They were targeting skill, mobility, and players who fit the direction the league was moving in. There was no rush to force anyone into the lineup, no pressure to speed things up. The timeline was still long-term, and the rebuild, at least to this point, was exactly what they promised it would be. Another year passes, and the Rangers finished second to last in their division and 26th overall in the NHL, firmly cementing their place near the bottom of the standings and putting them right back in the draft lottery. Exactly where a rebuilding team wants to be. But before the lottery ball even drops, the rebuild accelerates in a way no one saw coming. At the end of the 2019 season, Adam Fox made it clear that he wanted to be a New York Ranger, and the Rangers moved quickly, trading for his rights and instantly landing a defensive prospect most teams spend years hoping to draft. I mean, this guy was legit, and he turned down 2 other teams just to come to the Rangers, and all of a sudden, this wasn't just a team collecting future pieces anymore. It was a rebuild with a franchise defenseman already in place, and that changed the tone heading into the draft. The Rangers don't win the Jack Hughes sweepstakes, but they still land second overall, and in most drafts, that would feel like a disappointment, but in 2019, it didn't. Kaapo Kakko's stock had exploded over the course of the season, especially after his performances on the international stage, and by draft night, he looked like as close to a sure thing as you could find outside the top spot. That selection fit the rebuild perfectly. Kakko was a young, skilled, physically mature, and projected as a top-line winger who could grow alongside the rest of the core, rather than save the team overnight. On paper, this was exactly what patience was supposed to look like. But pair that with the Fox trade, and something subtle had already shifted. The Rangers weren't good yet, but they suddenly felt a lot closer, and once a rebuild starts to feel close, it's only a matter of time before patience starts to wear thin. And once the Rangers reached that point, with a franchise defenseman already in place and a second overall pick joining the mix, the temptation to speed things up became impossible to ignore. And this is where the rebuild bends a little bit. In the summer of 2019, the Rangers won the sweepstakes for Artemi Panarin, the most sought-after free agent on the market at that time. He signed a 7-year deal at $81.5 million, turning down offers from the Blue Jackets and the Islanders to join a team that technically still wasn't finished rebuilding, and that's what made it such a turning point. Panarin wasn't a complimentary piece or a low-risk gamble. He was a true superstar, arriving before the rebuild was complete and instantly giving the Rangers credibility around the league. The organization envisioned him as the bridge to the future, someone who could carry the offense, take pressure off the young core as it developed, and eventually become the centerpiece of a contending lineup once everything fell into place. Even the contract reflected that mindset. His $11.6 million cap hit was one of the highest in the league at the time, and it was seen as a price worth paying for a player who could change games on his own and accelerate the timeline of this rebuild. And I just want to make myself clear here, this was not a mistake by any means. Panarin was exactly as advertised and remains one of the most dynamic players in the NHL. But signing him shifted everything. Expectations rose overnight, the internal clock moved forward, the rebuild was no longer about patience and development, it was about making sure a superstar in his prime wasn't waiting around. Another year passes, and this time the season itself is cut short. The world shuts down due to COVID, and the NHL pauses, and the Rangers, they're left in a strange in-between spot. They were playing their best hockey of the year right before everything stopped. They were climbing the standings and starting to look like a real playoff team, even though they hadn't actually secured a spot yet. When the league returned in the summer inside the bubble, the Rangers qualified for the expanded postseason, only to be swept by Carolina in the qualifying round. It was a quick, frustrating exit, but it came with an unexpected reward, because that loss put them into the lottery. An unnamed placeholder team from the qualifying round won the first overall pick, which meant every team that had been bounced early suddenly had a chance at the top selection. And against all odds, the Rangers won it. Highly touted Alexis Lafreniere, first overall. At this point, they had everything. Elite veterans in their prime, elite prospects arriving in waves, and an elite goaltender emerging behind it all. The rebuild wasn't just ahead of schedule anymore, it looked pretty inevitable. And when the rebuild reaches that point, expectations start to grow and explode. The season that followed was anything but normal. The NHL returned with a shortened 56-game schedule, empty buildings, and no margin for error. And despite all the talent now on the roster, the Rangers still weren't completely ready. They hovered around the middle of the pack, never quite putting it all together, and when the season ended, they were once again on the outside looking in, missing the playoffs entirely. That left them drafting in the middle of the first round, a spot that perfectly reflected where they were as a team, no longer bad enough to land elite talent, but not good enough to justify rushing the process either. And they selected Brennan Hoffman with this pick, who just now, 5 years later, has scored his first NHL goal, so take that as you will. But the most important changes that year, they didn't happen on draft night. At the end of the season, the organization made a sweeping front office reset, moving on from general manager Jeff Gorton and team president John Davidson, the two architects that were behind this rebuild and began with the letter in 2018. And in their place, the Rangers handed the keys to Chris Drury, promoting him to both president and general manager and signaling that a new voice and potentially a new philosophy was about to take over this team. And that shift became clear almost immediately. Just weeks later, the Rangers traded Pavel Buchnevich, one of their most productive forwards, for Sammy Blais. It was a move that shocked fans and hinted at a change in priorities, valuing toughness and edge over skill and patience, even as the roster was still trying to find its identity. And in hindsight, this was an awful trade. This is where the rebuild quietly splits in two. The plan that began in 2018 was no longer being followed by the people who created it, and the direction from here on out would feel very different. But even after all of that uncertainty, the stalled season, the front office shakeup, the questions about direction, the trades, the Rangers finally got the year that made everything feel justified. In 2022, the Rangers exploded. They went on to win 52 games, finish second in the Metro, and for the first time since the rebuild began, they looked dangerous. This is the season where all of the pieces that had been accumulating finally came together all at once. Igor Shesterkin emerges as one of the best goalies on the planet, winning the Vezina. Adam Fox continues to establish himself as an elite defenseman, driving play and becoming the backbone of the defense. Artemi Panarin runs the offense exactly the way the Rangers envisioned when they signed him, producing at an elite level and making everyone on the team better. The Rangers stormed their way all the way to the Eastern Conference Final, surviving comeback wins, erasing deficits, and leaning fully into the no-quit in New York identity. They go down in a series, they fight their way back and prove prove, at least to themselves, that this team can handle pressure, adversity, and big moments. And just as important as the wins was how they were getting them. The kid line of Kaapo Kakko, Filip Chytil, and Alexis Lafreniere, they looked electric, driving play, creating offense, and showing real chemistry on the biggest stage. Even though the run ended in the conference final against the defending Stanley Cup champions, the Tampa Bay Lightning, the takeaway was obvious. This wasn't a team waiting for its window to come, it was already here. The expectation wasn't growth anymore, it was results, and that mindset shaped everything that followed. They moved quickly to solidify the roster, signing Vincent Trocheck in free agency to replace Ryan Strome, a veteran upgrade designed to fit cleanly into a contending lineup. This was a good signing, it was sensible, but it also reinforced the idea that development, that was no longer the priority. Winning now was the priority. The season was going just as well as the last one had been going, and then came the trade deadline. The Rangers went all in. They acquired Vladimir Tarasenko and Patrick Kane, chasing star power and playoff pedigree in the belief that they were only 1 or 2 pieces away from an even deeper run. At the same time, they officially closed the book on parts of the rebuild that never worked, moving on from Vitaly Kravtsov. On paper, this was a contending team, but in reality, it never really quite clicked. The season ends in disappointment, with the Rangers losing in 7 games to the Devils in the first round. A sharp comedown after reaching the conference final the year before, and yet, instead of panicking, the Rangers doubled down on the belief that they were already where they needed to be. In the offseason, they let the deadline rentals walk, choosing not to keep Kane or Tarasenko, and framed the summer as a return to balance rather than another all-in swing like they had the year before. The message was that this core was good enough to win on its own, and during the regular season, it looked like they were right. Artemi Panarin explodes for 120 points. Adam Fox, he produces at a point-per-game pace, and Alexis Lafreniere, he finally breaks out, scoring 28 goals and looking like the player the Rangers hoped they drafted first overall. Night after night, the Rangers racked up wins, finishing the season as the best team in the NHL and winning the President's Trophy. Once again, they make a deep playoff run, returning to the Eastern Conference Final and reinforcing the idea that this wasn't a fluke or a one-year window. They did end up losing to the Florida Panthers, who went on to win the Stanley Cup, and after winning the President's Trophy, this felt like the year the Rangers were supposed to take the next step, to finally break through instead of stopping just short again. Falling 1 round shy stung, but it didn't trigger panic because everything still appeared to be pointing in the right direction. Laffy had broken out and looked like a legitimate superstar in the playoffs. The elite players were doing elite things, and the team looked like it was still meshing as well as it ever had. From the outside, there was no reason to believe anything was wrong. The Rangers looked established, stable, and built to contend for a cup. Not just now, but for years and years to come. Which is exactly why what came next was so hard to see coming. After coming up short again in 2024, the Rangers ran it back, believing the window was still open. And early on, that confidence looked justified. They started hot, going 5-0-1 through 6 games and 12-4-1 after 17, sitting comfortably in a playoff spot and playing like a team that had unfinished business. But the shift came quickly. After a close loss to Calgary and then a not too close loss to Edmonton, Chris Drury sent a memo around the league signaling the Rangers were open to moving veterans including Jacob Trouba and Chris Kreider. Making those intentions public mid-season while the team was winning sent a shock through the locker room. The losses followed after that. 5 games later, Trouba was traded to the Anaheim Ducks. The Rangers won the game that night, but the momentum never returned. By the end of the calendar year, they had fallen to 16-19-1, and the frustration began spilling into public view. Kaapo Kakko was traded for Will Borgen, officially closing the door on one of the rebuild's core pieces. Locker room tension became impossible to ignore, and Drury doubled down on shaking things up by acquiring JT Miller at the cost of Filip Chytil. There was a brief rebound in January and February, but it just wasn't enough. The Rangers finished the season 39-36-7 and missed the playoffs just 1 year after winning the President's Trophy and making it all the way to the conference finals. Peter Laviolette, their head coach, was fired. Drury was extended, and with that, the rebuild that began in 2018, built on patience, long-term vision, was officially gone. The summer of 2025 marked the moment that the Rangers stopped pretending this is still the same team. Chris Kreider, the ultimate leader, a supposed lifelong Ranger and one of the greatest players in franchise history, is traded away, a move that would have felt unthinkable just a few years earlier. Not long after that, K'Andre Miller, once viewed as a pillar of the young defensive core, is sent to a division rival in the Carolina Hurricanes, further splintering what was supposed to be the foundation of this rebuild. I mean, they brought in Vladislav Gavrikov and he's playing well, but it doesn't change the reality staring back at the standings. The Rangers are now near the bottom of the Eastern Conference, far removed from contention, with a roster that no longer fits together and a core that no longer exists in one piece. And then, hauntingly familiar, comes another letter. In a message to the fan base, Chris Drury outlines a new direction, confirming that the Rangers will embark on a retool, language that opens the door to trading popular players and quietly acknowledges that the previous vision has run its course. That reality becomes even clearer when it's confirmed that Artemi Panarin will be traded. From a hockey standpoint, it all makes sense. Given the team's position and Panarin's contract status, it's the right call. But still, it hurts. After years of lottery luck, star power, deep playoff runs, and endless belief that this was the core, the Rangers are right back where they started, issuing letters, resetting expectations, and searching for a direction they once thought they'd already found. This should have been a dynasty arc. The Rangers had everything rebuilding teams beg for. On paper, this rebuild wasn't just successful, it was flawless. But rebuilds aren't finished on paper. Somewhere along the way, success arrived faster than patience. The plan that was built to take time started getting rushed. Short-term confidence replaced long-term discipline, and instead of letting the foundation fully settle, the Rangers kept pulling at it, convinced they were always one move away. What should have become a dynasty instead became a reminder that success too early can be just as dangerous as failure.